The neural exchange. Dr. Sarah Chen stared through the observation window at the Mariaxian diplomat writhing on the medical bed, its crystalline appendages flickering with distress patterns. The neural interface she designed lay dormant on the creature's sensory node, its lights pulsing in sync with the alien's biorhythms. "Turn it off," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That's enough for today." Her assistant, Dr. Marcus Webb, quickly terminated the connection. The Mariaxian's crystalline structure immediately settled into a more stable configuration, its natural amber hue returning. "Seventh failure this week," Marcus noted, updating their research logs. "Different species, same result. The neural patterns just won't stabilize." Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes. After 6 months of experiments, they were no closer to understanding why humans were the only species in the known galaxy capable of experiencing empathy in its full spectrum. The Galactic Confederation had made it clear this unique human trait needed to be studied, understood, and if possible, shared. "The problem isn't in the interface," Sarah muttered, more to herself than to Marcus. "We're missing something fundamental about how human empathy works." The laboratory door hissed open, admitting Ambassador Krull, their Confederation liaison. The tall, avian creature's feathers rippled with iridescent patterns, their species equivalent of facial expressions. Today, they displayed what Sarah had learned to recognize as concern. "The High Council is growing impatient," Dr. Chen, Krull announced, their translator converting the musical trills into crisp English. They expected more progress by now. Sarah turned to face the ambassador, straightening her lab coat. "With all due respect, Ambassador, we're trying to quantify and transfer something that your people didn't even have a word for until we made contact. Empathy isn't just emotion. It's a complex neurological process that evolved over millions of years. And yet your species managed it," Krull responded, their feathers shifting to a deeper blue. "The Council believes you're being selective with your research." "Selective," Marcus interjected, his voice sharp. "We've been transparent with every test, every failure." Sarah held up a hand to quiet him. "Ambassador, why is the Council so interested in human empathy? There are countless other unique traits among Confederation species. The Dorsani's quantum consciousness, the Vex's temporal perception. None of which fundamentally altered their societies the way empathy has shaped yours." Krull interrupted. "Your species' ability to truly understand and share others' emotional states has led to technological and social developments that should have taken millennia. Your medical advances alone." "Because we care about reducing suffering," Sarah said. "It's not just about understanding pain. It's about being motivated to do something about it." Krull's feathers rippled with what might have been frustration. "Precisely. The Council believes this trait could revolutionize Confederation society. Imagine if every species could truly understand each other's needs and motivations. Or imagine if they couldn't handle it." Sarah countered. "We've already seen how overwhelming human-level empathy can be for unprepared minds. The Mariaxian you just witnessed, that wasn't pain they were experiencing. It was emotional overload from feeling the presence of every conscious being within a 100-meter radius." The ambassador moved closer to the observation window, studying the recovering diplomat. "Then perhaps we need to start smaller. Focus on controlled, limited transfer of empathic capability." Sarah was about to argue further when her neural implant pinged. New data from the latest scan was ready for review. She projected the holographic display between them, and her breath caught. "This can't be right," she whispered, expanding the neural mapping. "Marcus, are you seeing this?" Her assistant was already running comparisons. "It's consistent across all test subjects. How did we miss this before?" The display showed a complex web of neural patterns, but what caught Sarah's attention was a subtle, recurring sequence that appeared in every human scan and was completely absent in their alien subjects. "What are we looking at, Doctor?" Krull asked, their feathers now showing genuine curiosity. Sarah manipulated the display, highlighting the pattern. "We've been focusing on the wrong thing. It's not about the capacity for empathy. Every species we've tested has the basic neural architecture to support it. But humans have this additional pattern, this framework that lets us process and integrate empathic information without being overwhelmed by it. A neural firewall, Marcus suggested. More like a filter, Sarah corrected. It's why we can feel others' emotions without losing our sense of self, why we can care deeply about strangers without being paralyzed by their pain. Every other species we've tested either has no empathic capability or would be overwhelmed by unfiltered emotional input. Krell's feathers had shifted to a color Sarah had never seen before. Can you replicate this pattern? Maybe, Sarah said slowly, her mind racing with possibilities. But it would have to be adapted for each species' unique neural architecture. It would take years of research, careful testing. You have 6 months, Krell announced. The Council is convening a special session to discuss the human empathy question. They want a working prototype by then. 6 months, Marcus exclaimed. That's impossible. The ethical considerations alone. Would you prefer the Council declare human empathy a control technology? Krell's feathers darkened. There are those who already view your species as a potential threat. Your ability to understand and manipulate others' emotional states. Some see it as a form of psychological warfare. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She'd known there were factions within the Confederation who distrusted humanity's rapid rise in galactic society. But this was the first direct threat she'd encountered. We'll need resources, she said finally, and test subjects who understand the risks. You'll have whatever you need, Krell assured her. The Confederation is particularly interested in applications for diplomatic corps and medical personnel. As the ambassador left, Sarah turned back to the observation window. The Mariaxian diplomat had recovered enough to sit up, their crystalline form refracting the room's light in complex patterns. Marcus, she said quietly, pull up everything we have on neural pattern replication and get me a direct line to the Earth Science Council. If we're going to do this, we need to understand exactly what we're trying to create. She placed her hand against the glass, watching her reflection overlap with the alien form beyond. In 6 months, they would either find a way to share humanity's greatest gift with the galaxy, or they would prove their critics right. That humans were too dangerous to be trusted with such power. The neural interface on the medical bed pulsed once, then went dark, as if sensing the weight of the decision that had just been made. The race to unlock the secrets of human empathy had begun, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to change the galaxy in ways no one could predict. In her pocket, her personal communicator vibrated with an incoming message. It was from her old mentor at Stanford. Be careful what you wish for, Sarah. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. She deleted the message without responding. They were well past the point of careful wishes now. The only question was whether they could control what came next. The protocol's birth. The Arcturian High Commander's office aboard the Confederation Central Station was designed to intimidate. Floating crystals cast ever-shifting shadows across the curved walls, while the artificial gravity fluctuated subtly, just enough to keep visitors off balance. But Dr. Sarah Chen had spent too many sleepless nights in her lab to be unsettled by mere environmental manipulation. Remarkable progress, Dr. High Commander Vexthor said, his exoskeletal plates shifting in what might have been approval. 3 successful transfers in the past month alone. Sarah watched the holographic display between them cycle through brain scans of their test subjects. Successful is a relative term, Commander. We've managed to create stable neural bridges, yes, but the long-term effects are still unknown. The images showed the results of their latest breakthrough. The successfully replicated neural pattern they dubbed the empathy protocol. It had taken 4 months of endless trials, countless failures, and one particularly memorable incident involving an enthusiastic Duraxian philosopher who'd spent 3 days experiencing every emotion in his research facility before they'd managed to disconnect him. Unknown effects are precisely why I've called you here, Vexthor said, manipulating the display to show a new set of data. My scientists have been analyzing your work. We believe the protocol could be enhanced. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Enhanced how? Your current version simply enables empathic capability. We believe with some modification, it could allow for more direct emotional control. Imagine diplomatic negotiations where both parties could literally feel each other's sincerity. Peacekeeping forces that could project calm into riot situations. The applications are endless and completely unethical. Sarah snapped, then forced herself to moderate her tone. The protocol isn't meant to be a tool for emotional manipulation. It's designed to foster understanding, not control. Vexthor's outer plates rippled in what Sarah had learned was amusement. Ethics are relative, Doctor. The Confederation faces challenges your species can barely comprehend. If we could prevent wars before they begin, stabilize volatile regions through emotional harmony. You mean through forced compliance? Sarah interrupted. I've read enough history to know where this leads. The commander's tone remained eerily pleasant. History is written by those who survive, Doctor. And speaking of survival, he gestured, and a new hologram appeared. A live feed from her laboratory back on Earth. Sarah's blood ran cold. Marcus was there, working late as usual, completely unaware he was being watched. The implied threat couldn't have been clearer. The Confederation has invested considerable resources in your research, Vexthor continued. We expect a return on that investment. You have 1 month to implement the modifications we've proposed. After that, he left the sentence unfinished. Sarah stood, her hands clenched at her sides. I'll need to see the specific modifications you're proposing, already sent to your secure channel. And Doctor, his plates shifted to a darker hue. This conversation never happened. The journey back to Earth gave Sarah plenty of time to think and to worry. In her private cabin aboard the transport ship, she reviewed the Arcturians' proposed modifications to the protocol. They were elegant, she had to admit. Subtle changes that would allow the user to not just experience others' emotions, but to influence them as well. Her neural implant pinged with an incoming message from Marcus. Something strange in the latest test results. Subject 23 showing unusual patterns. Need you to see this. She was about to respond when another message arrived. This one anonymous. Not all in Confederation agree with Arcturian methods. Proceed with caution. Allies watching. The transport shuddered as it entered Earth's atmosphere, and Sarah made her decision. She began typing out a series of instructions to Marcus, encrypting them with their private key. If the Arcturians wanted to play political games with her research, they were about to learn why humans had risen so quickly in galactic society. Back in the lab, the sight of armed security personnel at every entrance confirmed her suspicions. They wore Confederation uniforms, but their posture and positioning screamed Arcturian military training. Interesting decoration, she remarked to Marcus as she joined him at his workstation. I don't recall requesting additional security. Marcus glanced nervously at the guards. They arrived yesterday, said it was standard protocol for high-priority research. He lowered his voice. Sarah, about Subject 23. Not here, she interrupted, tapping her neural implant meaningfully. Marcus nodded, understanding. They'd developed their own silent language over months of working together, a necessity when dealing with alien species who could perceive sound frequencies humans couldn't. They spent the next few hours reviewing test data, their conversation deliberately mundane. But their implants carried the real discussion. Sarah, they want to weaponize the protocol. Marcus, the Arcturians. Sarah, who else? But Subject 23 might be our way out. Marcus, the anomalies in their results. Sarah, exactly. Send everything to my private server. And Marcus, watch your back. Subject 23 was a Mariaxian diplomat, the same one who'd failed their first test 6 months ago. They'd kept returning, volunteering for each new iteration of the protocol, driven by what they described as an inexplicable desire to understand. Their latest results showed something fascinating. Their crystalline neural structure wasn't just accepting the protocol, it was adapting it. Late that night, after the lab had emptied except for the ever-present guards, Sarah made her move. She initiated a deep scan of Subject 23's neural patterns, using equipment she'd modified herself. As the data flowed in, she allowed herself a small smile. The Mariaxian's crystal-based consciousness had done something unexpected with the protocol. Instead of simply replicating human empathy, it had developed its own version, one that was uniquely suited to their species' natural abilities. It wasn't just feeling emotions, it was experiencing them as complex crystalline harmonics. Send message to all test subjects. She subvocalized to her implant. Priority level alpha. Message begins. The protocol was never meant to make you more like us. It was meant to help you find your own way. End message. As she worked through the night, implementing subtle changes to the protocol's base code, Sarah thought about the Arcturian High Commander's threats. He'd been right about one thing. History was written by the survivors. But he'd forgotten that humans had survived countless attempts at control throughout their own history, not through force, but through connection, through understanding, through empathy. The modified protocol she was creating wouldn't give the Arcturians the weapon they wanted. Instead, it would do something far more dangerous. It would help each species discover their own unique form of emotional intelligence. The galaxy was about to become a much more complicated place. A soft chime from her workstation indicated another anonymous message. Arcturian fleet movements detected near Earth sector. Time running out. Sarah squared her shoulders and kept working. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. The real question was, did she? In the observation room next door, Subject 23's crystalline form pulsed with new patterns, broadcasting emotions in frequencies the human instruments could barely detect. The revolution had already begun. It just wasn't the one the Arcturians were expecting. The silent revolution. The news from Arcturian space made no sense at first. Reports trickled in through various channels. Government officials abandoning their posts, military commanders standing down their fleets, labor camps being systematically dismantled. But it was the footage from their capital world that truly caught the Confederation's attention. High Commander Vexthor, his exoskeletal plates now a shade of deep violet that had never been recorded in their species, stood before the Arcturian High Council. His voice trembled as he spoke. I felt them. All of them. Every worker in every camp. Every soldier following our orders. Every child raised to believe in their own superiority. I felt their fear, their hope, their humanity. He seemed to choke on the last word. We must end this. Now. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the broadcast from her secure facility on Mars, where she'd relocated her team after the first signs of trouble. Marcus stood beside her, his face pale. It worked better than we expected, he whispered. Maybe too well. Sarah nodded slowly. The modified protocol they'd released wasn't just allowing species to develop their own forms of empathy. It was catalyzing radical social change across the galaxy. The Arcturians had tried to use it as a control mechanism, uploading it to their entire leadership caste. Instead, they'd given them the ability to truly understand the consequences of their actions for the first time. Dr. Chen, one of their junior researchers, burst into the room. You need to see this. It's happening everywhere. The holographic displays lit up with feeds from across Confederation space. On the Mariaxian homeworld, crystalline beings were resonating in complex harmonies, sharing emotional experiences through patterns of light and sound. The traditionally warlike Duraxians had declared a cultural revolution, their quantum consciousness now expanding to encompass the feelings and experiences of others. How many species have developed their own versions of empathy now? Sarah asked, scanning through the data. 23 confirmed cases, Marcus replied. Each one completely unique. The Vex are experiencing emotions through temporal echoes. They're literally feeling the past and future impact of their decisions. The Zalaxians have developed some kind of collective emotional field that lets them share experiences across their entire hive mind. Sarah's neural implant pinged with an urgent message from Ambassador Krell. Their usually pristine feathers were ruffled in the holographic projection. The council is in chaos. Half the members are demanding the protocol be classified as a weapon of mass disruption. The other half are insisting it's the greatest breakthrough in Confederation history. What have you done, Doctor? Exactly what you asked for, Sarah replied calmly. We helped other species develop empathy. We just didn't specify what form that empathy had to take. A new alert flashed across her screens. Unusual activity detected in the Confederation's core systems. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized the pattern. The protocol wasn't just affecting individual species, it was changing how they interacted with each other. Marcus, are you seeing this? She highlighted a series of data points. The translation matrices are evolving. Species aren't just understanding each other's words anymore. They're understanding the emotional context behind them. That's impossible, Marcus muttered, but his fingers were already flying over the controls, confirming her observation. The matrices are quantum locked. They can't just. They can if every species using them is simultaneously developing new ways to process and share emotions. Sarah interrupted. We didn't just give them empathy. We gave them the tools to completely reshape how they communicate. The implications were staggering. Centuries of diplomatic protocols, cultural barriers, and ingrained prejudices were being dismantled in real time as species began truly understanding each other for the first time. But not everyone was celebrating. Sarah's secure channel lit up with a priority message from Earth's Security Council. Multiple reports of violence against protocol users. Anti-empathy movements forming in several sectors. Some species claiming cultural contamination. Requesting immediate consultation. They're afraid, Marcus observed, reading over her shoulder. Not everyone wants to understand others this deeply. Can you blame them? Sarah gestured at another screen showing riots on a Confederation border world. We're asking them to fundamentally change how they experience reality. Some species have spent millennia building societies around the idea that emotions are weakness, that understanding others makes you vulnerable. Her implant buzzed again. Another anonymous message. Arcturian resistance forces mobilizing. Claiming protocol users are compromised. Situation critical. Sarah took a deep breath, then opened a channel to all their research sites across the galaxy. Initialize Protocol Omega, she commanded. Authorization, Chen Alpha 97. Marcus's eyes widened. The failsafe. Sarah, if we shut down the protocol now. We're not shutting it down, she corrected. We're letting it evolve. The original protocol was just a framework, training wheels to help species discover their own emotional potential. Protocol Omega removes the scaffolding. From now on, each species' version of empathy will develop naturally, at its own pace. Across the galaxy, the effects were immediate and unpredictable. Some species experienced a temporary loss of their new empathic abilities, causing panic and confusion. Others found their capabilities expanding in ways even Sarah hadn't anticipated. The Mariaxian diplomat who had been Subject 23 sent a direct message. We understand now. The protocol wasn't the gift. The gift was showing us what was possible. Thank you. But as reports continued flooding in, Sarah realized they had crossed a point of no return. The Confederation's careful balance of power was shifting. Species that had been historical enemies were forming unprecedented alliances, while others were retreating into isolation, refusing all contact with protocol-influenced worlds. In her private quarters that night, Sarah reviewed the latest data, trying to predict where all this change might lead. Her screen showed thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously. A Diraxian peace fleet protecting protocol users from anti-empathy extremists. Arcturian refugees being welcomed on worlds that had feared them for generations. The Vex using their temporal emotional awareness to prevent conflicts before they could begin. Message from Earth Security Council. Her implant announced. Priority 1. The holographic projection showed the council chamber, but something was different. The usually stoic representatives were showing open emotion, concern, hope, fear, and determination, all clearly visible on their faces. Dr. Chen, the council chief, began, "We've received a transmission from deep space, a new species, previously unknown to the Confederation. They say they've been watching us, waiting to make contact until we showed signs of emotional maturity. They're requesting permission to open diplomatic relations." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "They were waiting for us to develop empathy." "No, Doctor. They were waiting for us to share it, to prove we could help others grow without trying to control how they developed." The chief managed a small smile. "It seems your protocol has attracted some interesting attention." As she ended the transmission, Sarah thought about the message she'd received months ago from her old mentor. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. He had been right, but not in the way he'd feared. They hadn't just opened a door. They'd knocked down walls that had separated species for millennia. Whatever came next, there was no going back to the old way of doing things. Her implant pinged one final time that night, another anonymous message. But this one felt different. Phase 1 complete. Galaxy ready for next step. Stand by for instructions. Sarah stared at the message for a long time, wondering just what kind of revolution they had really started, and who else might have been guiding it all along. The dark mirror. The first warning signs appeared in the Mariaxian crystal forests. Their once distinctive harmonics, which had evolved over millions of years to reflect their unique consciousness, began to shift toward a more standardized frequency. It was Subject 23 who first brought it to Sarah's attention. "Listen," they said, their crystalline form vibrating with concern. The holographic projection showed the forest's resonance patterns, complex symphonies of thought and emotion that had once been as varied as snowflakes. Now they were beginning to echo each other, losing their individual characteristics. "How long has this been happening?" Sarah asked, her fingers dancing across the control panel as she analyzed the data. "3 standard cycles," Subject 23 replied. "At first we thought it was harmonization, a natural result of our new empathic abilities. But now," they gestured to another display showing similar patterns emerging across different species. Marcus burst into the lab, his face ashen. "Sarah, you need to see this. The Doraxians, their quantum consciousness is destabilizing." The display shifted to show readings from the Doraxian homeworld. Their once unique neural patterns were starting to mirror those of other protocol-using species. It wasn't just cultural exchange anymore. It was homogenization. "It's not just them," Sarah muttered, pulling up more data. "The Vex's temporal emotional awareness is narrowing to match standard linear perception. The Zylaxian's collective field is breaking down into individual nodes that match the emotional processing patterns of non-hive species." Her neural implant buzzed with urgent messages from across the galaxy. Species that had developed their own unique forms of empathy were gradually losing their distinctive traits. The protocol wasn't just enabling understanding, it was erasing differences. "Emergency transmission from the Confederation Council," her system announced. The holographic projection showed the council chamber in disarray. Ambassador Krell's feathers were molting, a sign of severe distress in their species. "Dr. Chen, the council demands immediate action. The protocol it's changing us, all of us." "I don't understand," Sarah said, though a horrible suspicion was forming in her mind. Protocol Omega was supposed to let each species develop naturally. "There's nothing natural about this," a new voice interrupted. A figure stepped into view. Tall, humanoid, but with an otherworldly grace that marked them as something else entirely. "The protocol is functioning exactly as it was designed to." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Who are you?" "A representative of those who have been watching your experiment with great interest. You may call me Observer." The figure's form seemed to shift slightly, as if they weren't quite committed to their current shape. "We had such hopes for your species, Dr. Chen. Such potential." Marcus moved closer to Sarah, his hand hovering near the emergency shutdown controls. "You're the ones who sent that message about Phase 1. "Indeed." Observer's smile was unsettling in its perfection. "We've spent millennia searching for a species capable of developing true empathy. When we found humanity, we knew you could be the key to our grand project." Project. Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots she should have seen months ago. The anonymous messages, the convenient breakthroughs, the way other species accepted the protocol so readily. "We merely facilitated," Observer said. "The protocol was your creation, Doctor. We simply ensured it would work as intended." "As intended?" Sarah's voice rose. "It's destroying cultural diversity across the galaxy." "It's achieving unity," Observer corrected. "True empathy, Dr. Chen, requires a common framework. As long as species remain fundamentally different in how they process emotions and experiences, true understanding is impossible. The protocol isn't destroying diversity. It's creating a universal emotional language." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "By erasing everything that makes each species unique. That's not unity. It's extinction." The lab's displays continued showing the spread of the homogenization effect. Species that had once been distinctly different in their cognitive and emotional processing were gradually converging toward a common pattern. The galaxy wasn't just sharing emotions anymore. It was becoming a single type of consciousness. "Sarah," Marcus whispered, showing her a private display. "Look at the pattern they're all converging toward. It's not random." She studied the data, her heart sinking. The universal pattern emerging across all protocol-using species wasn't human, or Mariaxian, or anything they'd seen before. It was something entirely new, or perhaps something very, very old. "You're reshaping every sentient species to match your pattern," she accused Observer. "This isn't about empathy at all. It's about making us like you." Observer's form flickered slightly. "We are offering transcendence, an end to conflict, to misunderstanding, to the endless cycles of violence that plague diverse civilizations. Imagine a galaxy where every being truly understands every other being, because they all share the same fundamental way of experiencing reality, while losing everything that makes them who they are." Sarah countered. She turned to the council members. "We have to shut it down. All of it." "It's far too late for that," Observer said softly. "The process cannot be reversed. Those who have experienced true unity will not willingly return to isolation." As if to prove their point, riots were breaking out on worlds where governments were trying to restrict protocol use. Addicts, some were calling the users, emotional junkies desperate for the next hit of universal understanding. But Sarah noticed something else in the data streams, a pattern within the pattern. Species that had initially developed their own unique forms of empathy hadn't completely lost those traits. They were buried under the homogenizing effect, but still there, like a painting hidden under layers of whitewash. Her implant pinged with a message from Subject 23. "We remember our songs, Doctor. They're still here, under the new harmonies. We just need help remembering how to sing them." Sarah opened a secure channel to her lab teams across the galaxy. "New priority," she subvocalized. "Focus on pattern echo analysis. Look for traces of original species-specific emotional signatures under the convergence effect." She turned back to Observer, whose form seemed more solid now, more certain of victory. "You're right about one thing," she said. "We can't go back. But forward doesn't have to mean becoming you." "You cannot stop this, Doctor," Observer stated. "The protocol will continue to spread, continue to unite, continue to reveal the truth about what you really are." Sarah interrupted. "Because that's what's really happening, isn't it? The protocol isn't just changing us, it's exposing you. Every species that connects to this universal consciousness gets a glimpse of what's behind it." Observer's form flickered violently for a moment, and Sarah knew she'd struck a nerve. The question wasn't whether they could stop the protocol anymore. The question was, what would happen when the galaxy realized exactly what kind of consciousness they were being unified with? Her screens lit up with new data as her teams began finding more buried patterns. The homogenization wasn't complete. It couldn't be. Each species' original emotional signature was fighting back in its own way, creating a complex interference pattern with the imposed unity. Message from the Arthurian resistance, Marcus announced quietly. They say they found something in their ancient records, something about visitors who came before, offering unity. Sarah met observers' increasingly unstable gaze. This isn't the first time you've tried this, is it? How many civilizations have you unified across how many galaxies? The answer was hidden in the protocol itself, in the pattern they'd all been converging toward. They just had to figure out how to read it before they lost the ability to read anything else at all. The human variable. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the heart of the Confederation Central Station, surrounded by representatives of every known spacefaring species. The massive chamber hummed with tension. And something else, a subtle resonance that seemed to vibrate through reality itself. "Show them," she commanded. Marcus activated the central holographic array, and the chamber filled with light. Data streams from across the galaxy coalesced into a single massive pattern, the true face of what they'd been fighting. "This," Sarah said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "is what the protocol has been pushing us toward. Not unity, uniformity, not understanding, absorption." She gestured to the pattern. "And this is what we found hidden within it." The display shifted, revealing layer upon layer of buried patterns, the remnants of countless civilizations that had been unified before. Each one had left its mark, a final echo of resistance against the homogenization that had consumed them. Observers stood at the far end of the chamber, their form now flickering constantly between shapes. "You don't understand what you're rejecting, Doctor. We offer perfection. You offer extinction," Sarah countered. "We've decoded enough of the pattern to understand what you really are. You're not evolved beings offering transcendence. You're a virus, a mimetic parasite that spreads by convincing species to willingly submit to infection." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of responses: shock, fear, anger, and underneath it all, recognition. Species after species began sharing their findings. Ancient warnings carved into ruins, legends of beings who offered unity and brought oblivion. Buried memories surfacing through the protocol's enforced harmony. "The protocol was never meant to enable communication," Sarah continued. "It was meant to prepare us, to reshape our consciousness into a form you could consume. But you made one crucial mistake." She smiled. "You chose humans as your vectors." Observer's form stabilized suddenly, taking on an aspect that sent primal shivers through every being in the chamber. Humans were perfect carriers. Your empathy, your desire to understand and connect with others. Our empathy evolved alongside our individuality. Sarah interrupted. "That's what you never understood. Humans don't just feel what others feel. We understand that they feel differently than we do. Our empathy isn't about erasing differences. It's about bridging them while keeping them intact." She nodded to Marcus, who initiated a new sequence. Across the galaxy, modified versions of Protocol Omega activated, not to shut down the emotional connections that had been formed, but to restore the unique characteristics of each species' consciousness. "What have you done?" Observer's voice had lost its smoothness, becoming a discordant chorus of countless consumed consciousnesses. "We've added the human variable to your equation," Sarah said. "You thought our empathy would make us perfect carriers for your consciousness virus. Instead, it became the antibody." The chamber's displays showed the effects spreading across protocol-using worlds. The Mariaxian crystal forests rang with their original harmonies again, but now they could harmonize with other species' songs without losing their own voice. The Doraxian's quantum consciousness expanded once more, but now it could share insights across species boundaries while maintaining its unique perspective. "Impossible," Observer rasped. "The pattern cannot be broken. Unity cannot be undone." "We're not breaking it," Marcus said. "We're transforming it." True empathy doesn't require everyone to be the same. It requires understanding and appreciating our differences. Sarah's neural implant buzzed with messages from across the galaxy as species after species reported the same phenomenon. They were retaining their ability to connect emotionally with others while reclaiming their unique ways of processing and experiencing those emotions. Subject 23's crystalline form pulsed with complex patterns as they addressed the chamber. We remember now, all of us, not just our own songs, but the songs of those you consumed before. They're not gone. They're part of the pattern, waiting to be freed. Observers' form began to fragment, pieces of their assumed shape breaking the way to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. You cannot undo eons of work. We are unity. We are perfection. We err. You are afraid, Sarah interrupted. Afraid of true diversity, true connection. Afraid of what happens when beings learn to understand each other without having to become each other. That's why you've spent millennia consuming civilizations, trying to create a universe in your own image. But humanity showed us a different way. The chamber's displays showed new data. The modified protocol was doing more than just restoring species' unique traits. It was allowing them to share those traits voluntarily, creating a complex web of understanding that preserved and celebrated their differences instead of erasing them. This is real unity, Sarah declared. Not a single consciousness imposing itself on everything, but billions of unique minds choosing to connect while remaining themselves. Observers' form continued to dissolve, but now they weren't just falling apart. They were being transformed. The countless consciousnesses they had consumed over the millennia were awakening, remembering who and what they had been. Protocol final stage initiated, Marcus announced. Pattern transformation at critical mass. Sarah watched as the being that had called itself Observer underwent its final metamorphosis. The consciousness virus that had spent eons consuming diversity was being reformed into something new. A bridge between minds that strengthened their uniqueness instead of erasing it. In the aftermath, as species across the galaxy began exploring their restored identities while maintaining their newfound connections, Sarah received one final anonymous message. But this one wasn't from Observer or their kind. It was from something else, something that had been watching an even longer game play out. Phase 2 complete. Humanity proves its worth. Galaxy ready for true awakening. Stand by for contact. Sarah closed the message and looked out at the chamber full of beings who were different, unique, and finally able to truly understand each other without losing themselves. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as a single unified consciousness, but as a magnificent diversity of minds, hearts, and souls, each one precious and irreplaceable. Next steps. Marcus asked quietly. Sarah watched as representatives from across the galaxy began forming new connections, sharing their unique perspectives and experiences in ways that would have been impossible just days ago. Now we learn what real empathy can do, not as a tool for enforced unity, but as a bridge between the beautiful differences that make each of us who we are. In the restored Mariaxian crystal forests, new harmonies began to play. Songs that preserved their ancient rhythms while incorporating elements from 1,000 other worlds. The galaxy was learning to sing together, each voice distinct and vital to the greater symphony. The empathy protocol had evolved into something its creators, both human and otherwise, had never imagined. Not a force for uniformity, but a catalyst for the greatest flowering of diversity the universe had ever seen. And somewhere, in the depths of space, other watchers took note and began preparing for their own first contact with a galaxy that had finally learned the true meaning of unity through difference.